Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Appreciate that you didn't all just go on vacation after that last talk. And I'm really excited to be here. We're going to be talking about teams today, and in particular, a team that I was part of at Jellyfish during my time there. Late breaking news, I'm no longer at Jellyfish, but we'll get there in a sec. I want to start us off with a story. It was almost exactly a year ago, and the team was in crisis. We were months in, many months in, to a high-risk, high-stakes project, and it was not going well. We were replacing our operational data store with new technology designed to help us scale our platform. Now, things were taking longer than expected, no surprise there. And in the meantime, we were bringing on so many new customers that our old database was in danger of falling over before we could get the new one in place. Now, the team was working really hard, but these were not DBAs. These were, in fact, many of them had never worked on anything like this before. And a lot of them were actually new to Jellyfish. And we felt like we were right on the cusp, right? We were right on one more obstacle and we were going to get to the promised land. And it was sort of in this environment of a lot of pressure and this sort of impending doom on our heads that we started making mistakes. We started causing customer-facing outages. Now, nothing catastrophic, but enough to get the attention of the business. Now, this team had always been the backstop team. This had always been the go-to team. And all of a sudden, we were losing the confidence of our organization. So for the rest of our time here today, I'm going to talk about this team, the good parts and the challenges of managing a platform team in a fast-growing startup. Now, intros, and I'll make this brief, I promise. Most of the stuff that was said is correct. I've been around for about 2 decades, been in a lot of different companies, both mostly small, some on the bigger side. I've mostly had hands-on technical roles, but also leadership roles along the way. My interests are back-end, things like data architecture, service architecture, scalability. I'm relatively new to the DevOps world. I was part of a platform team both at Cloud Health and at Jellyfish. I'm currently working as a principal architect at Enalink, where we are helping bring data science and federated learning to healthcare research. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Other than that, I sort of stay away from social media. So I'm not going to have any tweets on my slides today. All hot takes will be in verbal form. And in terms of my non-professional life, I think the most important thing to know about me is I have 2 wonderful teenage boys. And when I'm not working, I'm keeping up with them before they fly the nest. And the second, I think, most important thing to know about me, and I'm sorry to bring in identity politics into the mix, but I am lean towards dogs, but I am cat sympathetic. These 2 are very dear to me. I had a colleague at Jellyfish, and we would often joke that the most important interview question we had was, are you a dog person or are you a cat person? So no right answer, no wrong answer, I promise. So let's talk about the team. Jellyfish is a Boston-based startup. They help engineering teams work more effectively. They help engineering teams align to the goals of the business. During my time there, the team went from under 20 to over 200. So the engineering team is about 50. And the customer base grew even more than that. The team we're talking about here today is is just your standard, like the numbers went up and down, but it's basically a two-pizza team, right? Engineers, team lead, and an engineering manager. I was in the role of engineering manager during the time we're talking about here. Okay, so slightly belated, here's our talk outline. We're almost done with the intros. Part 2 is what I am aspirationally calling the interesting bits. This is the heart of the talk, where I hope to talk about a number of our things that we learned along the way as a platform team in a fast-growing startup. It's my hope that there will be some things for you to take away here today, even if you're not part of a startup, even if you're not part of a platform team. Finally, at the end, we're going to get back to our story of the database to see what happened. All right, let's dive in. First off, platform health, what is that? So every team at Jellyfish is named after a sea god or a sea monster. This term was just a shorthand for basically our mission, our scope of responsibility. It was coined by my manager, Luke, at Jellyfish, but I really liked it. I really like how health implies that sort of set of both proactive and reactive mechanisms that we use to keep a complex system in balance, whether that is a biological system or a system of computers. So that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about platform health. Now, I just want to note that already in this talk, I've used the P word a number of times, unapologetically and unironically, and without any kind of caveats whatsoever or definitions. And we all know that platform is an overloaded term. We all know that platform team and platform engineering are buzzy words, right? I think we might be over the peak of the hype. I don't think we're quite into the trough of disillusionment. But nonetheless, I have a feeling that the folks in this audience probably have a lot of strong opinions about what the definitions of these things are. And I'm just going to ask that we hold those opinions loosely. I'm going to put forth a couple of what I think are conventional and definitions of these things in order to ground us for our discussion going forward. Excuse me. I'm going to invoke team topologies as an authority to help us with the definition of platform. I'm going to give you a moment to read this slide, because they say it much better than I can. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting and rich stuff in here. We're going to touch on a number of these things in the talk today. However, directionally, this is what I mean when I talk about platform. And this diagram is directionally what I mean when I talk about a platform team in the context of an engineering team structure, right? Generally, it is a horizontal team that is usually servicing multiple product teams or value stream aligned teams in the language of team topologies. And exactly what this sort of horizontal layer looks like in your organization is going to differ. I threw in an infrastructure team here just as an example. It's very likely that if your organization is much bigger, you will have more complexity inside this sort of horizontal substrate. You might have multiple platform teams and other teams along the way. At Jellyfish, it was simpler. There was just the one team. We didn't have an infrastructure team. We also didn't have other SREs who are either in their own team or as part of or spread out through the other teams. And that makes sense. That's just where we were. It was a small team. Another idea I want to talk about with respect to sort of a conventional platform team is a concept of the paved road. I'm not sure about the etymology of this term. I think it was from Netflix. But the idea is simple. That's what a platform team incentivizes product teams to use their services and APIs and technologies and best practices. Why? Because it's easier to do that than to go it alone. Now in practice, the paved road much more often looks like a windy path through the woods. And that makes sense. You have to start somewhere, especially with a small team. We may even have to equip our travelers on this path with bug spray, hiking boots, and whatnot. All right, so I want to shift away from the sort of what we might think of as a conventional platform team and talk more about the platform team at Jellyfish. This slide shows the domain, the 4 pillars of the domain of this team: system stability, system scalability, FinOps, which to the best of my ability means means preventing product teams from doing something outrageously expensive in AWS, and developer velocity. Now, you may notice that this is a very broad domain. It is likely that the stuff in here is not in most platform teams, especially at bigger organizations. But again, it makes sense, given the small team, that we're going to have a wide domain. And in fact, I think that more interesting than just the observation that it's a broad domain is the question of how do we decide what to work on. And I'm going to first ask the question, how do teams normally decide what to work on? Normally, we bring in the PMs, right? Make it their problem. It's great to have a great PM on your team, working all the time, enthusiastically talking to customers, etc. Now, I don't know about you, but in my experience, PMs for platform teams are few and far between. And in fact, at Jellyfish, there were no PMs. Well, there were, but they were spread across the product functions, which totally makes sense. So we really had to take on the PM function on our team. And so what I want to talk about next is sort of the core tenets. How did we approach this when we were thinking about the question of what do we work on? Number 1, the golden rule for PMs: know thy customer. Now, for conventional platform teams, this is probably pretty easy. It is internal product developers. And while that was true for us at Jellyfish, it was a little bit more complicated. We had a number of different stakeholders. We counted our external customers as customers, especially for some of the data delivery work we were doing. We also had a number of internal stakeholders: the finance team, the customer success team, and sales and marketing also would come knocking on our door periodically. It was really important for us to have a good sense of who our customers were. Number 2, relentless focus on business needs. Now, depending on your organization, but especially for bigger organizations, it's likely that the platform team is somewhat buffered from being directly impacted from the needs of the business. Of course, at a startup, we know that it is in our DNA to be tightly aligned and continually aligned with the needs of the business. And at Jellyfish, that was what happened. The needs of the business were probably the number 1 most important thing that affected what we worked on. Number 3, pushing down context and competence. Now at Jellyfish, we were big into developer autonomy. We were big into distributed decision-making across the teams. And so pushing down context and competence was the way that we enabled that. Okay? So pushing down context, not only technical context, but business context as well. And pushing down competence, what that means is making sure that your junior developers and your developers who are new get their at-bats. As senior members of teams, it can be so easy to want to just jump in and do the thing because we can do it more quickly, right? We've got to let our junior engineers skin their knees and so that we can bring them up to speed, so that we can get the full decision-making power of our team as quickly as possible. On that last point, pushing down context and competence, if that's something that you are interested in, highly recommend this book, Turn the Ship Around. It is about a submarine commander and fleet. However, I found that there's a number of great leadership lessons for us in software as well. I want to just mention the Eisenhower matrix. This is a sort of general purpose decision-making framework. And the idea is it plots urgency, increasing urgency going that way, and increasing importance vertically. The idea being that the upper right-hand quadrant are the most important things to do now. Now, the failure mode is if you live in that upper right quadrant, you're probably living in a crisis-driven environment. Ideally, you want to shift left into the sweet spot as much as possible so that you're working on important stuff that isn't quite so urgent, that doesn't have that impending deadline. Another failure mode is living too much in the bottom left quadrant. That is, things that are urgent but not important. These are things like Slack and email and just answering those random questions that come up. Yes, we need to do these things, but it's so easy to fritter away the hours when, in that quadrant when you know you should be working on the important stuff instead. I want to talk a little bit about cognitive load. First off, let's check in to see what Team Topologies says about cognitive load. They are very clear. Keep the domain narrow. Do not exceed the cognitive load of your team. And clearly, we are in violation of that principle, right? We have a very broad domain. But that is totally unsurprising. We're at a startup. That's what you sign up for. I want to talk about a couple of strategies that we use to manage this large domain. Number one, we can't be everywhere at once. We have to work together. We heard yesterday about managing and minimizing work in progress. That's what we had to do. Now, in practice, what we found is that we sort of oscillated, right? Like there were times when we really were focused as a team on one thing and one thing only. And then there was other times when things were looser and the team sort of dissipated a bit. Folks were working on their own thing. And then periodically, we would bring people back. We heard yesterday about entropy. And I can say from my experience, the second law of thermodynamics definitely applies to teams. By the way, I said I was cat sympathetic. Here's the evidence. Another strategy that we use to manage cognitive load. Be really intentional about what you bring into your team and what you push back on. And I'm going to talk about a couple of related concepts to that. Pay attention to team identity. It is easy for a team to feel adrift if they don't have a strong team identity. It is easy for a team to feel like they are the junk drawer of an organization. Now, it's also true that there are always things that fall through the cracks and that fall into no team's domain. What we found is that we really had to strike a balance between, on the one hand, sort of strict adherence to ideology, and on the other hand, being so loose that we completely dilute the team. It's important to find the right balance for your team. Number 2, MVP, which in this context means minimum viable platform. Team Topologies calls this thinnest viable platform. It can be hard, we know, as engineers, to draw the line at just good enough. It can be really hard to resist the siren song of the beautiful golden paved road. At the same time, being in a startup, it is in our DNA. We are constantly monitoring what we're working on, making sure that what we are working on is the most important thing. We are more often hacking through the woods with a machete than we are paving that road. I want to talk a little bit about team composition. I made mention before at the beginning that we did not have folks who had any particular specialized skills. In fact, we intentionally hired what we call platform generalists, right? These are generalist engineers with platform interests. We needed folks who were just as comfortable in Python as they were in Bash, as they were in Terraform, as they were in SQL, right? We needed folks who were adaptable and versatile. So in another aspect, so that was a very important attribute of the folks we brought on to our team. Another important attribute was, and I've alluded to this, was communication, right? We needed folks who were able to communicate with a lot of different constituents, folks with different technical levels, and folks who needed information at different levels of detail. It was not uncommon for one of our engineers to talk to the CFO of the company. So, and I think a foundational piece of this communication piece is what we call EQ, or social intelligence, right? We needed folks who were able to understand the perspective and the needs of people who were not like them. All right, I want to talk about metrics here. At Jellyfish, we were steeped in metrics. But I'm not going to talk about DORA metrics. I'm not going to talk about telemetry or observability. We've already heard a lot about that here at the conference. I want to talk about what I think are maybe a couple of non-obvious metrics that we found very useful in managing the day-to-day of the team. Sunk cost fallacy. Now, if you've ever had to pivot, if you've ever had to leave significant work behind, you know that sunk cost fallacy is real and it can be painful. Now, how does this tie in to metrics? If you know on an ongoing basis how much in dollars and cents it costs to that your project is costing, that can be a real eye-opener. It can also help you make those decisions, those hard decisions. Because if you have to pivot, you want to pivot as soon as possible. Number 2, allocations. Knowing in fine detail where your team is spending time can be a game changer, right? How much time is your team working on reactive toil versus working on the technical roadmap? How much time are they working on that strategic initiative versus spending time on the legacy system? Not only can this be really eye-opening, it can lead to a lot of great discussions around team identity as well as team process that can be transformative to your team. And finally, celebrating the wins. It is important to make sure that your team is being recognized for its achievements. we know that the marketing team is not going to give us a ticker tape parade when you correctly right-size the wall storage of your database. On the other hand, not doing so can be catastrophic, right? And this is totally understandable. People outside of your team are likely not going to know what you do, and they're likely not going to understand it. Nonetheless, it's really important to manage the reputation of your team and spending that time to make sure that your team's wins are celebrated. All right, finishing up, I want to just finish with the story that we started at the beginning. This was a project in trouble. And with this project, failure was truly not an option. We simply could not do nothing. So what did we do? I alluded to this earlier. We had to pivot. We had to pivot to a Band-Aid solution, right? Something that was a little bit hacky, but it was something that was, the technology that we used was a little bit more familiar. And I think less interesting than the technical details of that are how the team got through it. Because it was hard. It was hard to leave behind all the blood, sweat, and tears that we had already put in over those months. Number one, we had to learn how to focus. Every single person on that team had to know exactly what they were doing to get to the goal in fine detail. Number two, we had to learn to trust. We had to learn to trust each other and to hold each other accountable. And finally, we needed to learn to believe in ourselves, to believe that we were a team that could do hard things. Now, I would not wish this circumstance on any team, but at the same time, it's in the crucible of these kinds of challenges that great teams can be formed. And it's also true that no great team ever became great without challenges just like this. So yeah, we had to execute like crazy for months, and then we took that confidence and that momentum into our next project and into our next project. Now, this part obviously is not just relevant to platform teams, right? On the other hand, this was a critical path of this team's journey. And I am super grateful to have been a part of it. And I am also really grateful to you for your kind attention here today. And I want to thank you. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, you have a couple minutes.
We have a couple minutes.
You mentioned earlier about team identity, striking a balance between a strong team identity and being the drunk drawer, but still needing to manage things that don't necessarily have owners. How do you kind of maintain your team identity? How do you, when you have to take on, when you're living in the crisis quadrant of the Eisenhower matrix and you're handling those tasks and they get put on your plate, what do you do to maintain not having that work become part of your team identity in the long term, become part of the junk drawer, the ever-growing junk drawer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, and the short answer is you need to have those conversations with your team, right? There were times we took on work that was totally not in our domain, but we did it intentionally, and we did it because it was really important to the business, and it was because we had the capability to do it. But we stayed grounded in our team identity. And part of it is just reiterating it and reiterating and having the discussions. Second quick point there is like, we found that some engineers needed it more than others, right? And so that was where the role of a manager would come in to make sure that folks who might be feeling adrift or low morale, basically it's having those discussions and making sure that they stay grounded and knowing that, hey, at the end of the day, there's always stuff. You're not the only team who's getting dumped on, right? It's almost certainly the case, hopefully, that other teams have their problems too.
I think we're at time. We are at time.
If you have other things, I'm happy to hang around. I'll be out there, and come find me. Thank you very much.